Welcome to the Personal Podcast, where we get to meet the real person behind the professional. I'll remind you of the 4 rules. There's no direct business questions, no small talk, honest answers only, and where relevant, you can flip the questions back around to myself. So, my guest today is Catherne Devereux, who's partner at Nights and founder of the Headlight Project. Cath, why is the date 6th of May 2018 significant to you?
So that's the date that Russ died, and I think it'll be imprinted on my heart forever, really.
And how did Russ die?
It's well known, really, in terms of Russ's story, but Russ killed himself. He died by suicide on the 6th of May 2018, and he jumped off the Leven Viaduct.
Why did he decide to do that?
That question is, I suppose, the only person that really knows the answer to that question is Russ, and he isn't here to answer it. But we know that he had a really adverse reaction to an incident that had happened at work, where the death of one of their drivers on a customer's site had a massive impact on him. And really I can only describe it as almost like a breakdown in kind of the 7 to 10 days after the driver died. And Russ just became extremely worried, full of anxiety, worried about the business, about the people losing their jobs. Because obviously when an incident like that occurs, there's a huge investigation by the health and safety executive. So, you know, in some ways we do have some answers, because we know that was the kind of precursor in the days before he took his life.
It is a very brutal subject. Where were you when you heard the news?
I was actually at my sister's house. She lives in Norton, and we'd gone for a family barbecue. It was a boiling hot weekend, the 6th of May 2018, bank holiday weekend, and one of those freak times that we rarely get in the northeast, where it's just kind of like southern Spain. It was just absolutely glorious. And I was at my sister's, and Russ was due to meet us there, and he never arrived. And I think one of the things that I struggled to do for a long time after was go to my sister's house, and I think that was probably because that's where the police came to see me. So, you know, difficult for my sister Jo, because she obviously wanted us to be there, and but I think it was a good year or so after that I was even able to go back to her house or to the garden where we were all sitting at the time.
Oh, bless you. So the police knocked at the door and delivered the news?
They did. They'd actually contacted me at home, and the neighbour had seen the police car outside the house, because I'd rang the neighbour to see if Russ's car had left, because he was dropping some bits and bobs off at his dad's house. And when I rang my neighbour, they said there's a police car outside the house, and Mike actually went out and the policeman came over, and then he spoke to me on the phone. But he said, you know, something's happened to Russ, but I can't tell you over the phone. I need to come in and see you. And I just knew Charlotte, actually, because I knew that if Russ had been injured in some way, they'd have said, you need to get yourself to the hospital. Or so I just knew that he wasn't alive at that point. But I obviously had to sit and wait for half an hour until the police arrived.
How was that half an hour? Stupid question.
It felt like the longest half an hour of my life. And it was the most bizarre situation, because I was sitting waiting at the front door with my sister, and the children were all out playing with their cousins in the garden, and, you know, my brother-in-law was doing a barbecue, and I just remember kind of sitting waiting for the police car to pull up, but hearing all the noise in the garden where everyone was having fun, and just thinking it was like I'd just entered a parallel world, really, at that point. But the policeman who arrived, it was one policeman, and my sister went out to greet him, and when she turned round, I just could tell by her face that the news was bad. And he actually came in and said, you know, he's been found at the bottom of the viaduct, which I was actually really shocked about because Russ was so petrified of heights. He was a very cautious, kind of risk-averse person, and his car had just been left bang in the middle of the viaduct, and he'd just gotten out and jumped. So, but the policeman on that day was absolutely lovely. He'd actually lost his sister, I think, in a sort of domestic abuse situation. I remember him saying, you know, I don't know how you're feeling, but I can empathise because I've lost somebody very close to me in really difficult and tragic circumstances. And but from that point, it was just kind of a blur, really. The shock was just immense. Nothing can prepare you for it at all.
Horrific. And can you even remember like how you were feeling at that moment you were told, or was it disbelief? Or?
Yeah, I think I was just. I don't even think that I cried at that point because I think I was just in total shock. And my first thought was, you know, this about for the three girls. They always were at the forefront of everything Russ and I did. So I just thought, what am I going to do? I'm going to go out. You know, I'm going to have to go into the kitchen here and into the garden and I'm going to change their worlds forever. So I remember just sitting in my sister's front room, and that was the room that I just couldn't go back in for such a long time. So yeah, it was incredibly hard. It's hard to talk about just looking back at it, really, but
it's hard to hear. So I don't know how you must feel. You're so brave for speaking about it. Was that the lowest point, or did it get
Absolutely
worse?
not. No, that wasn't the lowest point at all. I think it was the most it was a difficult, really traumatic time because I was then, as Russ's next of kin as his wife, I had to go and identify his body. So that was really difficult, but it's almost like your body goes into shock and there's like this protection there. I think the shock protects you from and enables you to kind of go and do the things that you've got to do, you know, legally. And that definitely wasn't the hardest. The days kind of in the weeks and the months after, where the reality of knowing that was, you know, Russ was gone forever were definitely the hardest times.
Oh, goodness. And you mentioned that you got your children together in your sister's living room. Did you tell them straight away?
They were playing in the garden, with it being such a lovely day. And I did. I went into the garden, and I remember standing in the kitchen with, you know, my sister and I think my mum and brother, and just saying, you know, what am I going to say to them? And but I thought, I've got to go out. I've got to go and tell them because I had to tell them, and I had to tell them as soon as I could, really. And I just sat them down on the bench and I just said, there's been, you know, Dad's been involved in a terrible accident and he's died. And the moment of it was like this primal scream that it was just piercing. They all broke down and probably did for maybe 5-10 minutes, sat cuddling me. And then it was kind of like, right, we'll go and play again. And then, you know, as a child does, they'll be absolutely distraught. But then they went off and, you know, got onto the swing and carried on playing with the cousins. It was incredible, really.
Is that the hardest thing you've ever had to do?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I think that is definitely the hardest thing I've ever had to do. And subsequent to that, because they were very young, they were kind of 10. Well, Matilda was only 9 at the time. Her birthday was literally a few days after Russ died. Anna was only 6 and Agnes was 3, so they were so young. And the conversations that I've had to have since have been incredibly hard, but again, ones that I knew that I had to have at the kind of age-appropriate time, to be honest, to have that honesty with them.
Yeah, and I take it you did that on individual occasions with them?
Yeah, absolutely. The oldest one, Matilda, I remember in the week or so after Russ died, because obviously she knew how to go on the internet, and
of course,
the day after Russ died, there was a journalist at the door, and Russ and I didn't have any sort of social media presence. I'm still kind of not. We didn't do Facebook or Instagram or anything like that. And so they said, if we don't get a quote from you, we'll just make something up. So not in the sense that we're going to make something kind of nasty up, but they were aware that he was a prominent business family in the area. You see the trucks, and so it was a newsworthy story. So I knew that I had to say to Matilda, and also that when they go to school, everybody knew about it, and I was just worried that somebody would say. So I just said, had she heard the word suicide? And she said, I have. And I had that discussion with her about, why somebody can become ill mentally, that their mind becomes poorly in the same way that kind of someone's heart can stop working, or, and that was fine. We kind of could reason it to the extent that, suicide is reasonable. It's so, and again, with Anna, that situation happened at a very similar time, because, we were coming up to kind of year 6 in school for Tilde, and then it was just in the kind of the last really kind of year or 18 months to 2 years that it's come up for the middle one. And I've always wanted to give them permission to ask the questions that they wanted to when it was right for them. And sometimes that comes about because if, birthdays, when it was their dad's birthday last year, I said to Annie, if there's anything you ever want to ask me about how Dad died and what happened, you can. And lo and behold, 2 nights later, she sent me a little text message from up in her bedroom in the loft. Can I talk to you? And so, I had the same conversation with her, and that, it's soul destroying. It breaks my heart all over again for them, and for us as well. You just never think you're going to tell a 10-year-old that, that their dad killed himself. It's brutal, but I think that honesty and at the right time was the right way to deal with it. Certainly for us.
No, I believe it's important as well. And how are the children now about it?
They're really, I suppose, maybe accepting, if the word is probably a good way to describe it, in the sense that I think I've still got the youngest one to go through the motions with.
Okay.
And, there's times that she'll recall a memory, and but with the older two, we talk quite openly, we talk very openly about their dad, and recall memories, and we talk about things, about how he was at that time, and how much he worked, and how much he loved work, and how hard he worked, and I suppose the charity's kind of given that kind of a positive aspect, as positive as it can be when you lose somebody that you love as much as we loved Russ, but yeah, they're good. They absolutely astound me. Children are so resilient, and I think as long as they've got that love and support and that honesty, I think it's keeping them on the right path. And so yeah, they're doing good. They're doing good.
Oh, it's good to hear, and I'm in awe of how you managed to keep moving forward. It's hard enough doing what you need to do with 2 children. You've got 3 children, and then suddenly you find yourself in this position. How on earth did you survive?
Do you know, I think that is a really difficult question to answer, because I don't know how I did survive in those first kind of year to 2 years, but I know I did it with the incredible love and support of my amazing family. My mum and dad and my brother and sister and their families were just incredible, and I think I really, it came to a point where I'd focused for such a long time on what I'd lost in Russ, and I remember I was 40 just after Russ died, and we'd had all these plans and lovely things to do, and And I went away for the very first time without the children. Russ and I rarely went away. We'd have the odd night away, but never had been abroad without them. And a friend said, let's go away. We went somewhere lovely and warm for 5 days. And she said, if you get to the airport and you don't want to go, we won't go. And leaving them was one of the hardest things that I did. But going away and having that time, I kind of was able to reflect on the focus had been this huge loss, this massive rust-shaped hole that we all had within us. And coming back when I was so excited to see my mum and the 3 girls who were waiting on the train station in Northallerton for me, and they all came running. And I thought, why I've got to keep going. I've just got to. And they are. I was incredibly lucky to still have them, and mum and dad and brother and sister who were absolutely willing me to get through it, really. So.
You mentioned there that's how it helped you keep going. Did you ever contemplate suicide yourself?
I actually I did at one time, and it's so hard to
take your time.
There was, for such a long time, I thought I can't live without him, because I'd known him since he was little and we'd grown up together. Our whole lives were just each other and the kids and our families, and friends as well. We were so interconnected in everything that we did. And in those kind of days and weeks afterwards, I remember thinking, if like this, I just needed to be with Russ. But every night I'd lay and think, I've got these 3 girls that I've just got to get up for and get to school every day. At that point, I think I was at such a low, and I remember speaking to my mum, and she said, I think you need to go to the doctors. And I'd started getting some counselling help, and the counsellor had also said that she felt that I needed some support. So I did go to the doctors, and from that point I took antidepressants for about 18 months. And I honestly think that saved my life, really, because people have varying views on antidepressants, and I know lots of people take them and lots of people are against them. But for me, it was the ability to kind of almost operate evenly, because I was having these huge dips where I physically just didn't think. I'd be on overdrive when it came to the girls, almost like robotic, thinking, right, I've got to get up, I've got to get them to school. And I went back to work about 6 weeks after Russ died.
6 weeks?
Yeah, because there was only me to think about. We'd lost kind of Russ's salary, and we had a whole problem with our life insurance policy because it was suicide. So
oh my goodness,
none of that paid out. And I just thought, so I kind of was on this almost robotic mission to keep the girls sorted and get them to school and keep them in the daily routine. But then having these kind of other thoughts of just thinking, this is just, how am I going to carry on in this life that's really just not worth living? But actually that support and the help, taking those tablets really helped to. I remember taking them for the first 2 weeks and feeling absolutely dreadful, sickly, and it was awful. I thought I felt even worse, but once it kind of got into my system and it helped me just level. It doesn't take away any of the pain or the grief that you're kind of trying to process, but it helps you just to function, I think, and that's what I did, along with getting some external support with counselling to help with the whole kind of trauma of it, really.
Oh, bless you. And you touched on that pain. Are there any words that can articulate how that felt?
Oh, I actually feel it makes me feel sick when I think of the pain when it was at its strongest, because it's like a physical pain as well. It was like my heart was aching, and I couldn't really describe that. It was just kind of, there's a poem by Nick Cave that I think he wrote when his son had died, and it talks about kind of all the visions and kind of dreams that you have. And I remember on a night, I used to actually think that I could see him, like that he was trying to speak to me, but you know, your mind is in such that's the trauma, and it took me a long time as well to not because I struggled sleeping, but to go to sleep and not all I could see was Russ falling, and that was really hard to try and process that, to keep having to go over and over it again. That's what's kind of exhausting about a death by suicide, really.
Mm. And were you ever angry?
Oh gosh, there's a book that C.S. Lewis wrote, an observation of grief that he wrote when his wife died, and he has this. There's a quote in it that says that I sat with anger long enough until she told me her name was grief, and that made so much sense to me with hindsight now, because the anger. There's different stages of grief, and they don't, it's not kind of, it doesn't happen one after the other. It can happen in different stages. There's the despair and the anger, and the anger's a huge part of it. And I think on the difference with where there's been kind of an explained death, or a death that was expected as opposed to a suicide, is that you feel so angry with the person because you feel like there was a choice. You're thinking, how could you leave us? How could you have we did everything together, we talked about everything, we shared everything. How could you not have told me that this is how you were feeling and that you were going to do this? Because if you could see now, if you could have just held on for one more day, if you could just see the damage and the destruction that's caused and the number of people that are affected by it, but then that kind of follows on to that reasoning of, I knew how much Russ loved us. I knew how much we were just the core of his life. He did everything for us. He worked hard for us. He had lovely friends and family. And, if it had been, in his mind, there can't have been a choice. He was ill, he was poorly. And that's how I had to come back to thinking, in the same way that I'd told the girls, I had to tell myself that he wasn't well. And there was a large part of his body that just stopped working and worked against him ultimately. All that reasoning and rational thought that enables us to function and do, everything that we would do normally is just gone with somebody. I think with suicide, it's and that's where I go full circle. I had to kind of go around that cycle, be really blooming angry. And I remember one day the counsellor saying to me, you need to buy something, or buy a watermelon and go and just fling it at the garden wall. And I did. This huge watermelon. I remember just chucking it and just smashing it against the wall, just almost to release that, because I had all this anger, and I had 3 children as well that I had to protect from that anger. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want anything that I felt, because that was my relationship with Russ, to have any impact on them. They're what I've always tried to protect. So yeah, that was it was a struggle. And even now, nearly 6 years on, there's still times when I feel angry with him. And I think more angry as well for him, that what he's lost and what he's missed. But I can't stay angry at him for very long, because I love him, and I always will.
Oh, and were your thoughts on suicide different before all this happened compared to how they are now? Oh,
absolutely. The word suicide was just not in my vocabulary. I knew there was nobody close who I knew had ever been affected. I remember when my brother was about 18 and he worked at a DIY store over in Cargafleet, and he had a friend who he worked with that had taken his life then, all those years ago. And I remember thinking just how terrible that was, but you never think it's going to be you. I had probably a real misconception of the sort of person that would take their own life, and until Russ did it, and then I thought it doesn't discriminate. And the more kind of stories that I've come across, and recently as well, I struggled to find a story that was like Russ's, where he was hardworking, he was clean living, he did sport, he did all the things that generally to look after yourself. He had a happy home life and family and lovely friends. So that was difficult to try and kind of reconcile with. But then recently, where there's been the death of the head teacher, you know, with the Ofsted.
Yes.
And then I read recently about the postmaster who, when...
Yes.
And they felt like very similar situations to Russ, where they were so conscientious and so dedicated to their jobs that this kind of... And I think with Russ, it was the HSE that have to come in and investigate. That impact on them was just something that was just overburdened, that they just couldn't cope with, and they felt that there was going to be some sort of shame or reputational damage, and so just recently those two stories have kind of struck a chord to kind of think it was very similar to how Russ must have felt, and that external kind of force that gives that stress.
Do you blame the HSE? Just a quick message from our sponsor, Be Daily. If you'd like all the relevant business news that you need to know on a daily basis delivered directly to your inbox, please subscribe to Be Daily.
I think there's lots of things they could do better in terms of how they deal with the people that are, you know, certainly where there's it's not nobody's fault. There was a terrible accident, and you know, they'd done what was right, and but you know, there's always there's always something to be found, and I think that was what Russ was incredibly. But I think the way that they inspect is extremely harsh, and it doesn't take account of the humanity that's behind the people trying to run that business and the responsibilities they have, and when they're a good employer and they're a respected employer, that's important.
It's almost like business owners or business directors don't have feelings, they're not humans. You know, the way they're treated sometimes in those situations. Exactly,
and it's a lonely job, isn't it, at the top? It can be tough when you can't share that responsibility.
Yeah, definitely. And how do you keep Russ's memory alive while still managing to move on with your life?
I don't think I need to work at keeping it alive, because I've got 3 pairs of blue eyes that look at me every day that you know, just embody him, really. And you know, he's still a huge part of our lives. And you know, I have, moving on's kind of a strange term, because you don't want to say I've moved on from that person, because that person's fundamentally always part of you, and you know, the part of everything that you do going forward, even in kind of the decisions that I make, and you know, and I'm in a new relationship now, and Russ is almost part of that relationship too, because without him, that other person wouldn't be part of our lives. So, you know, it's kind of not something, I don't need to keep his memory alive. He's just there, and obviously the charity's a huge thing, but he'd be absolutely mortified that there was a charity named after him. Oh, he'd be absolutely mortified, yeah. But I think that that has to move forward as well, and not just be about mine and Russ's story, because there's so many other people that it's come to help, that it's about everybody's story, and it's about having that place to go to when you're affected by suicide. So,
but the fact that you do share your story in the name of the charity is just incredible, because I think people, because there's, and it's wrong, but because there's always been shame attached to it, people don't talk about it, and then people don't realise the devastating impact it has on people. It's almost like it doesn't really count as grief because it was their choice. They don't understand that.
No, it is. It's such an anomaly, and I think in olden days, you know, even the terminology we use now, you know, is died by suicide, or he took his own life, because commit suicide is, you know, it was a crime in olden days, and so, you know, it's educating ourselves about, you know, what it is, and the mind is massively powerful, as we know. Mental health is huge, and so, you know, one of the things I think that really motivated me to talk about it was exactly that you know, Russ was a lovely human being, and he didn't deserve deserve to die with the shame that he felt, and therefore I felt like I kind of almost took that on to talk about it, to say, this, you know, we need to look at this. And I couldn't believe the amount of people that were affected, and whether I just noticed stories more then because I'd been affected. But even going back to years and years ago where people then said, well, you know, their mum or dad may have taken their own life, and it's opened, you know, kind of that discussion. And that's what I didn't want the girls to feel shame either about how their dad had died. That was really important to me. And I know it would have been important to Russ as well.
Oh, it's amazing what you're doing with the charity. We'll talk more on the charity in a bit. Do you believe Russ is watching over you, or have you ever had any experience that's led you to believe that?
It's funny because when I was brought up a Catholic, so, you know, we always had kind of faith. And I think since Russ died, I've probably lost that faith a bit. And I've maybe got a lot of thinking to do about that whole situation, but my dad has a really lovely kind of theory about how spirits communicate with you, and he says that's what, through your dreams, in your subconscious, you know, when you go and you're relaxed. And it's funny because I do dream about Russ a lot. In the early days, there were traumatic dreams about him, you know. I'd lost him and then I couldn't find him, and then, or he'd just appear and I'd say, where have you been? And he had no idea, you know, kind of what the impact had happened. And so, but there's definitely there's moments where I feel we were coming back from holiday when, not long after he died, I went with my friends and they said, you know, you've still got to come because we'd had this holiday booked. I think actually it was maybe the year after. Yeah, it was the summer after May 18, and I took the girls myself on a flight, got up at 3 o'clock in the morning, they were all tiny, drove to Newcastle Airport. My friends were already out there on holiday in Portugal, and anyway, we all flew back together, well, one family with us, and there was a diversion and it was really late at night coming back from Newcastle Airport, and I remember Joanne, my friend, they were behind us in the car, and I thought, where am I going here? And I turned round and got to this junction. And as I came down the slip road, a massive Devereux truck it was a ridiculous time of the night. It was going that way, and I thought, right, it's going back to the yard. So I got behind it, and it's moments like that I just think that often a Devereux truck pops up when, like, I might be in the charity office and one will just go past the window, or and we always think about whenever we see a dragonfly. I was sat in the garden by myself after he died, and I think the girls were at school, and the garden was a massive kind of solace for me. I used to go and we were kind of getting the garden sorted, and I love gardening, so I used to just go and buy a few plants and then make that my task for the day, that I'd go and plant. And one day I was sitting at the shed, this huge blue dragonfly, kind of bright neon blue, just flew up to me and then kind of hovered around for a bit and then just flew off over the fence, and I kind of chased it over the fence, and every so often we see these blue dragonflies in the summer. So yeah, whenever
they're
we
quite
see
rare, aren't they?
They are. Yeah. The blue ones are, and the ones that are quite big, you don't see them very often
around
at
here.
all. Yeah. So yeah, we've got a few dragonflies around the house now, which is a lovely reminder. But yeah, definitely.
Oh, and if he is listening to this, what would you want him to hear, or would you like to say anything?
Oh, I'd tell him off. That is the first thing that I do. I would just, well, he always knew how much we loved him, and, you know, I hope that he would look at the girls and just think, you know, they're doing well, and despite it all, you know, they're our focus and they always will be. And I've made sure that we used to say to them, be good, be kind, work hard, and I've made sure that they've kept doing that. So
so lovely. And obviously the charity then came about.
Yeah.
You know, you had enough on your plate. You know, why did you decide to set up a charity on top of everything?
I know, and believe me, I've questioned myself at some points as well, because it hasn't been easy. But I think the charity's been a huge part of my healing as well. It gave me focus, and I got such a lot from being able to help other people and have something there for the situation that I found myself in, that I felt wasn't, in our locality, there wasn't anywhere that you could. I needed to talk to somebody who'd lost somebody to suicide in the same way Russ had died, and that just wasn't there. So it started off though really from children, and we piloted these little schemes about having workshops to talk about the topics that are really difficult to talk about with children. And loss can not just be somebody dying, it can be a family separating or families getting divorced, or how friendships looked, what anger was like. So there were huge kind of areas that we piloted, and it took off really well. And a lot of the head teachers at the time where I was working, they just didn't have the money, but they knew that mental health provision and counselling provision was really important for children, and really forward thinking of them. Most head teachers and teachers are amazing because they're with children every day and they know what they need, and they do so much anyway that any extra support that can go in to schools for children. So that's kind of where it came from. But ultimately, I didn't know that I wanted to do something around suicide because that's how Russ had died. But at the time, it kind of was just an evolution. And then the charity grew, and we kind of got more people on board in terms of therapists. And then we're offering bereavement counselling, which is kind of the main service. And then ultimately it grew into the preventative education and training, which is kind of the more recent facet of it, but that's really that's been really positive and something that I feel if we're ever going to try and get the numbers down in the area, we've got to the only way that you ever change things is by educating and
talking about
things.
That's
it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I've got a stat here in front of me that suicide is the leading cause of death in men under 45, and our region, the northeast, Tees Valley, has the highest rate in the UK. Why do you think that is?
Do you know, I have no idea about why our area is one of the highest all the time. I don't know whether it's kind of because the one thing I do know is that it's not, one size doesn't fit all in terms of the individual who's going to take their own life. And I think in some ways we're probably all have the capacity to do it, but it's just whatever happens in our life or the triggers, there's a line and we may get close to that line or we may never get close to it. So it's a really difficult one to know, but, demographics, it's lifestyle, I don't know, but certainly kind of Russ goes against all of the the assumptions, I think.
And why is there, we've heard that stat, how common it is. Why is there still shame attached to it for some people?
I don't know. And I can understand why there is shame because, even just telling you earlier about how I felt, that I almost feel ashamed that I kind of, we get this one life that's so precious and, people that love us and then to feel like you just give it away is really hard to understand. But again, that comes back to the whole biology and psychology of the mind. And I remember speaking to my sister-in-law, Katie, whose mum died about 2 years after Russ, I think, from cancer. And it might have been a little bit later. And I know she'd fought so hard to stay alive in all the treatments and I struggled with that. I remember actually saying to Katie, I feel so bad that your mum fought so hard and yet Russ went out one day and just jumped off a bridge. And but again, it's that full circle thing of understanding that in some ways it's no different. That's your mind and it's something that stops functioning in the way that it should. The chemicals in your body are not where they should be in the same way that cancer's caused or so it's very hard to reconcile that, but
Yeah. And I think when I was younger, I think that was very much my mindset as well. You know, what a terrible waste when there's people who want to stay alive.
Yeah.
But it's only when you start to understand the brain and how it is just the same as a physical illness that's
Absolutely.
destroying you.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's just more people need to hear those conversations.
That's absolutely it. And you know, there is no shame attached to it. What I suppose there's shame in the fact that we just do not have the financial and resource that goes into it centrally to, you know, support the NHS and to support mental health provision. And that, you know, we rely on charities. That's kind of the shameful thing, really, that there's not the support and the resource put into it that should be. So it's such a difficult topic, but ultimately, I don't feel that it's any different to any other illness. Where when somebody dies.
Do you feel in your grief you were treated differently to perhaps if Russ had died of natural causes?
I think it's with hindsight now looking back, I think it's very hard for people to know what to do and what to say. And at the time you think they should know. And, you know, you can. I remember feeling quite astounded and flabbergasted at certain things that were said to me. But with hindsight, unless you're in that situation, it's really difficult to understand. So, yeah, I think it's hard for anybody. The grief that comes with suicide is very complex. It is different to a normal grieving process, and you need to deal with the trauma of the death because it can often be very traumatic the way that the individual's died before you're able then to process your grief naturally, because grief is a natural process. We all do it. If you love somebody, you will, and they die, you will grieve at some point. So you need to be able, with suicide, there's a lot of trauma attached to it that needs to be addressed first before you can then go on that normal journey of healing and let the grief kind of run its course, really.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you touched on the fact that you've done a lot of work in schools, working with children, which I think is so important. But there's some people out there that would consider that morbid, or they don't need to know about that, don't tell them about that.
Yeah.
But I believe it's important. I take it you do too.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, again, a huge misconception that you can't talk to children about death and dying, because they're all going to experience it at some point. Of course, it's an age-appropriate matter. You're not just going to go and talk to children about somebody jumping off a bridge, if they're 5 and 6 years old. But it's having those age-appropriate conversations. And the reason that Russ must have felt very isolated in those moments, in those days before he died, feeling that nobody understood the pain that he was feeling. And I can, to some degree, understand that from how I was feeling in the depths of my grief, feeling that, unless you've lost somebody, nobody can understand at all. Mm-hmm. So it's so isolating. And it's the same for children. Children generally just want to fit in. They go to school and but if you've lost somebody, or if your mum or dad or sibling or whoever it might be who you love has died, that makes them different. And so we have to try and normalise that by talking about it and giving the child the space to talk about it. And that in turn will educate those around that person so that they do then know how to respond and how to act when somebody's in those circumstances.
Absolutely. One of my first experiences or hearing about the word suicide was at school, because one of my friends, they were in my year at school, 1 year above and 1 year below, their dad ended their life. And but the thing was, at school, even the next day, nobody was talking about it.
And I think that's what's incredibly hard. And obviously you don't want to go in and talk about it, there and then, but there has to be safe spaces for that discussion to be had. And, I often think about the girls going back to that time, and it was so hard for me to have the conversation without breaking down. So for them, they were stuck between not wanting to upset me, but needing to ask questions as well. So yeah, it is, and we have to use the word suicide. That is what, you know, if somebody takes their life, it's a suicide. And the more that we are kind of comfortable and sit at ease with that, the more progress I think we'll ultimately make.
Yeah, that's really important because, people have problems with that word.
Yeah.
And I remember it was just never mentioned at school. It was the 90s, very long time ago. But, and I think even the friends needed support, just to talk about
absolutely.
it.
How do you do you help? You want, that's your friend, and how do you help them deal with that situation where it just becomes a huge elephant in the room?
Yeah.
So, and those kind of, the little workshops were those little safe spaces where somebody could talk, or if there was a group that had been bereaved or had gone through a difficult, separation, parents, that was the ultimate kind of the little seed that was planted as to where kind of the charity came from, really.
Oh, it's so important. The charity just does some amazing work. And I am a trustee, and I'm really proud to be one.
We're so proud of having you as well, because you do an amazing job.
Oh, thank you. On to a more positive subject, you'll be pleased to know. But you are Tees Valley's most inspirational business leader. How does that feel?
I'm always really embarrassed about that. It was funny because on the day that I went to there was a little get-together at Harvey Hugo, and Dave Allen was saying, you've got to come. And I was thinking, I don't want to go. And anyway, they announced it, and there was all these business. I don't consider myself a business leader at all. I've worked in the Tees business community for a long time. I set out with Devereux, and I'm with Knights now, and it's such a wonderful community. We had such support after Russ died, and the companies now that support the charity, you guys and Charles Clincards and AV Dawson, they're just absolutely wonderful. And without them, we couldn't really kind of, it's got momentum because of that. But I remember, I think I got a trophy, and I remember leaving, getting in the car, and I went home, and I took the trophy to the officers because I was thinking it's not me, it's the charity. And then my mum has a little volunteer. She was a deputy head teacher, my mum, and she's retired now for a lot of years. But she has a voluntary job in James Cook, and she works in the cafe helping out every week. And one of her colleagues said, I saw Catherne had won this. So she came on, she said, well, why didn't you tell me? I hadn't told anybody, actually. Aww. So she just kind of, because it isn't really why, and they know that's not why I do it. But I was absolutely flabbergasted, to be honest. And, to the people, I couldn't even be mentioned in the same list as most of the people.
Well, you are, and you're top. You talk about, all these great businesses like wanting to help and support you. And it is because for that reason, you are an amazing leader, and you're just such a lovely person that people want to help you. And part of that is because of how brave you are sharing your story. So, you are 100% a leader. You don't need me to tell you that you've got the award, but just to add that. But is that...
It's absolutely lovely. I feel very, very honoured, but I still sit very uncomfortably next to it. And, I couldn't have, the charity would not be what it is today without the team and without the wonderful trustees that, give their time freely and voluntarily, because it's a lot of hard work. And, there was, when you mentioned earlier about, giving myself that job of setting up a charity, this has been times where I've thought, what the heck have I done? As well as my job. And we did have a conversation, as as trustees, where, I was I'm almost like a CEO of the charity, but working, not doing it as a job. And I remember us having the conversation as a trust board, and, Emma saying, well, you're actually doing it. And I said, but it isn't my job, and it's not why I set it up. And, but I love it. Every time I'm reminded of a family that's been helped, that's why I, however little time that I do get, I am really proud of it, and so I can understand where that comes from.
Oh, absolutely, you should be proud. Is that one of the things you're most proud of in your life?
Yeah, I am. I sometimes don't. I think sometimes I don't sit and think about what it took to do really at the time that I did. I think I was kind of on this little mission of, being propelled by Russ and having to make sure that his story was told. And I'm from a family of teachers, and my sister Joanne, she tells we're so kind of removed from it in a business world. She works in an area of Darlington where they have free school meals, and
I've met her and I've been to that school.
Yes, of course, yeah, it's an absolutely beautiful school, but she tells me the stories, and I just think, oh my goodness, so the work with children, I feel most proud about, because I think that's where we've got the ability to change, and that's what I'm driven by. It's these next generation being able to deal and talk about their problems so that it doesn't hamper them in later life, and that they can go on to, have solid relationships and good jobs and all that, come out as well-rounded human beings, because you can be the brightest person in the classroom, but if you've got all of this emotional trauma and baggage and that's going to stop you from living a fulfilled life, then there's no point, is there? So
no, absolutely, that's a big motivator for me as part of the charity as well. You really feel like you can make a difference there. Okay, so final question: on the darkest of days, why is life worth fighting for?
I think I've realised, coming from a point where I didn't really want to live anymore, that this life is so precious. It's you come into this world, and every day can be a challenge, but every day can be absolutely amazing as well. And I think I am so grateful for the smallest of things now. I don't sweat the small stuff anymore. If the house is a mess, or saying that, the girls might disagree with me when I'm shouting at them for messy bedrooms and things. But I'm so grateful for the family and the children and the friendships and the love that I've got in my life. And despite everything that I've lost in losing Russ, I feel incredibly lucky that I still have got so much love in my life, and that's why it's still worth living.
Oh, and that answer there is why you are the most inspirational leader. It's, you are an absolute inspiration. I can't even say the word. But on to a lighter note. On to the regular questions. So this is where it's a bit of fun at the end of such
so funny.
a traumatic subject. But on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you rate yourself at the following 10 things? 1's the worst, 10's the best. How attractive are you?
Oh, goodness me. Well, once upon a time I might have said an 8, but I'd maybe say 7 now, given all my wrinkles. And I get spots as well as wrinkles. How does that work? 45 and still get spots. I could take one or the other.
Well, you're certainly funny. How funny would you?
I think I've got good crack, I think, but maybe an 8 or a 9.
Awesome.
Put myself up there then.
Are you a good cook?
I've got a lot better. I'm not a cake baker. I couldn't bake a cake to save my life, but I'm a pretty good home cook. I like cooking lovely teas and experimenting. I've got a lovely friend, Joanne, who's kind of pushed me on the way because she's a fantastic cook. So I'd say that I'd be a 9 now.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Are you a good singer?
In my head, I'm a 10. But if you've ever heard me on a karaoke, I'm a definite 1. But I absolutely love singing.
Oh, me too. I have the same problem as you.
Yeah,
I love it.
I just think I sound amazing, but I'm not.
Until you hear it back, you're like, actually. Do you drink much? Do you drink a lot of alcohol?
Well, I'm on dry January, so and that's going all right. I went through a bit of a bad stage of drinking too much, probably, but I can drink. I never started drinking until I was about 25, so I'm definitely a late starter. But I love a glass of wine, any red or white wine. So I'd probably give myself how good I am at drinking a 10. But hangovers are 1.
Oh, yeah, I can't do them anymore.
No.
Parenting skills.
Well, I think nobody's perfect when it comes to parenting, and there's always something to learn and, always something to do better. So, but I'd say I'd be up in the upper halves there, so I'd maybe give myself a 7 or an 8.
Awesome. And how good a friend are you?
I'd say I'm a good friend. Maybe a 9 for that.
Oh, brilliant. Intelligence. It's a funny one because
It
so
is.
many facets to it. But how intelligent are you, Kath?
I'd say I was pretty good at my expertise. So given that I've got clients, then I'm definitely a 10 for employment law knowledge. My common sense sometimes can let me down.
It's my downfall
yeah,
too.
That's it. So, and I think Matilda's picked that one up from me. So
Bless her. A score?
For intelligence, so 10 for work, 1 for common sense.
Okay, I'll take that. How kind are you?
I'd hope that kind would be one of the things that I'd be remembered for. So, yeah, I would give myself a good strong 9 for that.
Brilliant. And finally, how good at sex are you?
Definitely 10.
That's a very popular answer, 10s.
Maybe I'd like to think that in my head, I think.
I can't. I was about to say, oh no, I'm sure you are, but then how do I know?
Exactly.
Brilliant.
That might be for another podcast, Charlotte.
Another podcast. Do you know what? It would make a good spin out. I know some people skip right to the end and just want to hear that for every guest. So, yeah.
Do you know, there were such good questions, though, those. I did, when I was looking at them, I said to Matilda, apart from the last one, I didn't ask her because she's too young. But yeah, we were laughing at the answers. So great questions, loved them.
Oh, thank you very much for being an amazing guest.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, it's Ryan from Harvey Hugo and I am the videographer here. So are you looking for a new way to stand out in today's crowded digital landscape? Well, look no further than podcasting. Here at Harvey Hugo, we specialise in creating and producing high quality podcasts that engage and inspire audiences. And with our comprehensive production services, we'll take care of all the technical details, from the recording and the editing to the distribution and the promotion. With millions of listeners tuning in every day, it's the perfect time to start connecting with them on a deeper level. Let Harvey and Hugo help you unlock the power of podcasting and take your message to the next level.